I was still in my robe when the knocking started, sharp and impatient, echoing through the hallway like it already owned the place. It was barely light outside, the kind of hour where nothing good ever arrives at your door. My phone buzzed, and the security guard spoke in a voice that told me something had gone very wrong. He said, "My son was downstairs with his wife and a crew of movers." He said they were demanding access. He said my son was telling everyone this house no longer belonged to me. I did not rush. I did not argue. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and listened as years of quiet disrespect suddenly lined up behind that door. I remembered every family dinner where my words were ignored every time my son spoke over me, while his wife smiled like she had already won. I remembered the documents I signed in silence, the decisions I made alone, the plans I put in motion long before anyone thought to challenge me. When the guard asked what he should do, I smiled and told him to let them in, because what my son thought was a power move was really the beginning of his mistake. He believed ownership was something you could shout loud enough to claim he believed I was too. Tired, too slow, too unaware to see this coming. What he did not know was that I had already finished preparing for this moment. What he did not know was that every step he took toward humiliating me only brought him closer to the truth. And if you stay with me until the end, you will see exactly how betrayal turns into regret, how arrogance collapses under facts, and how patience delivers a kind of justice that no shouting ever could. My name is Douglas Fairchild. I'm 68 years old, a retired architect who spent 40 years designing homes for other families while building a life inside my own. My wife Margaret passed 3 years ago, leaving me in the house we built together in 1982, the same house where we raised our son Daniel, the same house where I thought I would live out my remaining years in. Peace. The doorbell rang at 5. At 7 in the morning. Not a polite ring, not a hesitant press, but a persistent, aggressive buzz that cut through my sleep like a blade through cloth. I had been dreaming of Margaret, as I often do, her voice soft in my ear, telling me something I could never quite remember upon waking. The sound ripped me from that comfort and deposited me into darkness. My heart pounding against my ribs, I pulled on my robe and made my way down the stairs, each step slower than the last. At my age, you learn not to rush toward trouble. Trouble will wait for you. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see shapes, more than one, standing on my porch. The motion light had clicked on, casting them in harsh white illumination. When I opened the door, my son Daniel stood before me. Beside him was Claire, his wife of 8 years, holding a leather folder against her chest, like armor behind them. 3 men in matching navy uniforms waited near a large truck parked in my driveway. The words, "Premier Moving Services," were painted on the side. In gold letters, the engine was still running, exhaust rising into the cold morning air like breath from a sleeping beast. Claire spoke first. She always spoke first. "Good morning, Dad. I know this is early, but we wanted to get started before the day gets too warm." Her smile was the kind you practice in mirrors, all teeth and no warmth. "This house is being prepared for sale. Daniel and I are handling your affairs now. You signed the authorization yourself. Remember, we discussed this." I looked at her then, at the folder in her hands. She shifted it slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the documents inside the bottom of a page, where 2 signatures sat side by side. One was meant to be mine, though I had no memory of writing it. The other I recognized immediately. I had watched that handwriting develop from shaky childhood letters to confident adult script. It belonged to my son Daniel, would not meet my eyes. His hands were clenched at his sides, knuckles, white jaw tight. He stared at a spot somewhere past my shoulder, at the hallway behind me, at anything that was not my face. In 45 years of knowing my boy, I had learned to read his silences. This one screamed across the street. A light flickered on in Eleanor Wright's window. Eleanor, who had been Margaret's closest friend for 50 years, Eleanor who never woke before 7, the light stayed on, steady and watching, and something in my chest settled into place. A piece of a puzzle I had not known I was solving. Claire was still talking, explaining timelines and logistics, using words like transition and appropriate care, and what's best for everyone. The movers shifted restlessly behind her, eager to begin their work. Daniel remained silent, a statue of guilt carved in the shape of my son. I could have argued, I could have demanded explanations. Threatened lawyers slammed the door in their faces. 3 years ago, I might have done exactly that, but Margaret's death had taught me something about patience that 40 years of architecture never had. You do not argue with people who have already decided you have lost. You let them believe it. You watch, you wait, you remember. So instead of shouting, instead of weeping, instead of giving Claire the reaction she had clearly rehearsed for, I simply stepped aside and said, "Let them in." Claire's smile faltered for just a moment. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, there and gone, like a shadow passing over water. This was not in her script. The grieving old man was supposed to protest, to make a scene, to give her justification for whatever story she planned to tell. Later, my calm unsettled her more than any anger could have. The movers filed past me into the house I had built with my own hands, their boots heavy on the hardwood floors Margaret had chosen 30 years ago. I watched them begin to assess my furniture, my memories, my life, reducing everything to items on a clipboard. Daniel finally looked at me, just for a second. In his eyes I saw something that might have been an apology or might have been a plea. Then Claire touched his arm, and he looked away again, and the moment was gone. They came to take my home. What they did not know was that I had been waiting for this knock. I just did not expect my own son's signature to be on the blade. While the movers measured doorways and calculated square footage, I stood in the corner of my living room and let 45 years of memories wash over me. They could catalogue the furniture, estimate the value of appliances, reduce this house to numbers on a spreadsheet, but they could never inventory what these walls truly held. Margaret and I built this house in 1982, the year Reagan was president, and the economy was struggling, and everyone told us we were fools to take on such a project. We were young, then younger than Daniel is now, full of the kind of stubborn optimism that only exists before life teaches you its harder lessons. I designed every room myself, staying up late at the kitchen table of our tiny apartment sketching floor plans, while Margaret looked over my shoulder and suggested changes. She wanted big windows in the living room to catch the morning light. She wanted a covered porch where we could sit and watch storms roll in. She wanted a nursery close to our bedroom, even though we did not have children yet, because she believed in preparing for the future. The future came faster than we expected. Daniel was born in the spring of 1980. 2 years before the house was finished, he took his first steps in this very living room, tottering across the hardwood floors toward Margaret's outstretched arms, while I held my breath and prayed he would not fall. He climbed the oak tree in the backyard every summer until he was tall enough to reach the lowest branches without help. He carved his initials into the wooden railing of the porch when he was 12, and Margaret pretended to scold him. While I secretly smiled, this house watched my son grow from infant to boy to man. It held our Christmases and our arguments, our quiet dinners and our loud celebrations, our ordinary days that I did not realize were precious until they were gone 20 years ago, when Daniel was in college and our hair had begun to turn grey. Margaret insisted we meet with a lawyer about estate planning. I thought it was unnecessary, the kind of thing wealthy people did not, middle-class architects with modest savings, but Margaret had always been the practical one, the one who saw around corners. We established a family trust to protect our assets, signed papers I barely understood, and filed everything away in a safety deposit box. It seemed like paperwork at the time, nothing more than legal formality. I did not know then that Margaret was building walls. I could not see she passed 3 years ago. Heart disease, the doctor said, as if those 2 words could explain the collapse of my entire world. I held her hand in the hospital room while machines beeped their steady countdown, and I told her everything would be fine, the way husbands do when they are lying to themselves as much as to their wives. 1 month before she died, when she still had the strength to squeeze my fingers, she pulled me close and whispered something that I dismissed as fever talk, if anything. "Happens to me," she said. "Go to Eleanor. She has things I couldn't tell you while I was... Well, promise me, Douglas, promise me you'll go to her." I promised because it cost me nothing to promise. I assumed she was confused, mixing up her thoughts the way sick people sometimes do. Eleanor Wright was our neighbour, Margaret's closest friend, since they were both young mothers pushing strollers down this very street. They had raised children together, shared recipes and secrets, supported each other through every hardship that 50 years of friendship could bring. I loved Eleanor like a sister, but I could not imagine what she could possibly have that Margaret could not simply tell me herself, so I made the promise, and then I forgot it. Margaret died, and the grief swallowed me whole, and Eleanor came to the funeral, and held my hand and told me to call if I needed anything. I never called. I never asked. I buried my wife, and I buried whatever message she had tried to leave me because I was too broken to listen. Then Claire appeared in Daniel's life. That was 10 years ago now. Though it feels like both yesterday and a lifetime, she was charming in the way that certain people are charming, the way that makes you feel special for receiving their attention. She asked me questions about architecture, about Margaret, about the house. She remembered birthdays and brought thoughtful gifts and called me Dad before the wedding invitations were even printed. Daniel seemed happier than I had ever seen him. What father would question such a blessing? I watched a mover run his hand along the mantelpiece where Margaret's photograph still sat, her smile frozen in silver frame, and I thought about the promise I had failed to keep. My wife tried to tell me something before she died. I did not listen then, but I am listening now. The change did not happen all at once. That is how these things work. I suppose if Claire had shown her true face from the beginning, I would have seen her clearly. Instead, she revealed herself in increments so small that I mistook erosion for evolution control, for concern. It started after Margaret's funeral, when grief had hollowed me out and left me vulnerable in ways I did not recognize. Claire began visiting more often, bringing casseroles and sympathy, sitting with me in the kitchen while Daniel worked late. She asked how I was managing, whether I was sleeping, if I needed help with anything. Around the house, her attention felt like kindness. I did not yet understand. It was reconnaissance. The first suggestion came wrapped in worry. "You shouldn't drive at night anymore." "Dad, the roads are dangerous and your reflexes aren't what they used to be." I had been driving for 50 years without incident, but she spoke with such conviction that I found myself agreeing. One concession seemed harmless then. Came another, "Let me handle the bills from now on. You might make mistakes, and we don't want anything falling through the cracks." Before I understood what was happening, Claire had inserted herself into every corner of my life. She redirected my mail to Daniel's address, explaining it was more efficient that way. She scheduled my doctor's appointments and insisted on attending them, sitting in the examination room and answering questions on my behalf as if I had lost the ability to speak. She changed the passwords on my computer, claiming she was protecting me from scammers. She monitored my phone calls, always appearing in doorways when I picked up the receiver, always asking who I had been talking to. When I hung up, I began to feel like a guest in my own home, the house I had built with my own hands. The house where I had raised my son and buried my wife's memory in every room slowly stopped feeling like mine. Claire rearranged the furniture without asking. She removed Margaret's photographs from the hallway, storing them in boxes in the attic where they would not collect dust. She suggested I might be more comfortable in the downstairs bedroom, since the stairs were getting difficult for me. Even though my knees had never given me trouble, Each change was presented as a gift, a thoughtful adjustment for my benefit. Each change pushed me further toward the margins of my own existence. Daniel noticed nothing, or perhaps he chose not to notice. He worked long hours at his accounting firm, came home tired, and accepted whatever version of reality Claire presented to him when I tried to raise. Concerns gently, carefully, he dismissed them with the same phrase, "Every time she's just trying to help Dad. You should be grateful," one evening, about a year after Margaret's death. Daniel mentioned something in passing that I filed away without understanding its significance. We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset behind the oak tree, and he said casually, "Claire asked me to sign some papers. Yesterday, she said it was routine. Something about the house insurance needing an update." He shrugged as if it were the most boring topic in the world. "I didn't really read them. She handles all that stuff. I should have asked questions. I should have demanded to see those papers, should have insisted on understanding what my son had signed. But I was tired, and the sunset was beautiful, and I told myself it was probably nothing. Insurance paperwork, routine updates, the kind of mundane business that families deal with every day." That night I went to bed early and lay awake staring at the ceiling sometime after midnight. I heard footsteps in the hallway. A shadow appeared at my door. Daniel stood there in the dim light, his hand on the frame, his face a mask of conflict I had never seen before. "Dad," he said. "Quietly, I need to—" From downstairs, Claire's voice cut through the darkness like a knife. "Daniel, I need you right now." My son's mouth closed. Something shifted behind his eyes, a door slamming shut. He turned without another word and walked back down the hallway, his footsteps fading into silence. I lay there in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for him to return. He never did. The next morning he acted as if nothing had happened. I tried to bring it up over breakfast, but Claire was there, pouring coffee, filling the room with chatter about weekend plans and grocery lists. Daniel ate his eggs and said nothing. The moment had passed, swallowed by the machinery of Claire's careful control. I replayed that scene 1,000 times in the months that followed my son at my door, trying to tell me something, needing to speak words that his wife would not let him say. My son had something to tell me every time he tried. Her voice pulled him back. I should have walked to him. I should have closed that door behind us both. The discovery came by accident, the way so many life-altering moments do. I was searching for a pen that had rolled behind the cabinet in the study, down on my knees, with a flashlight, when my fingers brushed against paper. An envelope had slipped into the narrow gap between the furniture and the wall, probably months ago, forgotten and gathering dust in the darkness. I pulled it out and sat back on my heels, recognizing it as an old phone bill from the previous quarter. Claire had taken over managing the household accounts, so I rarely saw these statements anymore. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me pause, some instinct I could not name, and I slid my finger under the flap inside the envelope, tucked behind the phone. Bill, like a secret passenger, was a document I had never seen before. The header read, "General Durable Power of Attorney," in bold black letters. Legal language filled the page, dense paragraphs about authority and decision-making and the right to act on behalf of another person. My eyes skipped past the formalities and landed on the signature line at the bottom. My name was there, Douglas Fairchild, written in handwriting that looked almost like mine, but not quite. The letters were too careful, too deliberate, as if someone had practiced them repeatedly before committing pen to paper. And the date beside the signature stopped my heart cold. 3 months ago. The document claimed I had signed it 3 months ago, on a Tuesday in October. I remembered that week with perfect clarity, because I had not been home. I had been 400 miles away, visiting my sister Patricia in Ohio. She had just undergone knee surgery, and I spent 5 days helping her around the house, cooking meals she could not prepare herself, keeping her company during the long afternoons of recovery. I had photographs on my phone from that trip time, stamps that proved exactly where I had been. I had not signed this document. I could not have signed it. Someone had forged my signature and backdated it to a week when I had a perfect alibi. My hands trembled as I looked further down the page below the line, for my signature was another line marked with a single word, witness. A witness. Signature is required to validate a power of attorney, to confirm that the person signing is who they claim to be, that they are signing of their own free will. The witness is supposed to watch the signature happen to verify its authenticity. The name written on that line was Daniel Fairchild, my son's handwriting, my son's signature unmistakable. I sat on the floor of my study for a long time, the document resting in my lap, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Daniel had signed as witness to a signature I never made. He had put his name on a legal document attesting that he watched me sign something I had never signed. Either my son had knowingly participated in forgery, or he had been deceived into believing he was witnessing something legitimate. The memory surfaced like a body rising. From deep water, Daniel on the porch sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, his voice casual and unconcerned. Claire asked me to sign some papers yesterday. She said it was routine, something about house insurance. He had not read them. He trusted his wife. He signed where she pointed and asked no questions. Routine papers, that was what Claire had called them, and Daniel trusting Daniel. Exhausted, Daniel had simply done what she asked. I wanted to believe that version of events. I wanted to believe my son was a victim too, that Claire had slipped this document into a stack of innocent paperwork and guided his pen to the witness line without explaining what he was truly signing. The alternative was too painful to consider. The alternative meant my son had looked at a forged signature, bearing his father's name, and chosen to validate the lie. I could not confront him, not yet, if Daniel was innocent. Warning him would only alert Claire that I had found the document she would destroy. Evidence create new lies, tighten her control. If Daniel was guilty, confronting him would accomplish nothing except to arm my enemies with knowledge of my suspicions. Either way, I needed more information. Before I made any move that night, I began keeping a journal. I found an old notebook in my desk drawer, one I had used years ago for sketching architectural ideas, and I started writing down everything, every strange comment Claire had made, every document she had asked me to sign, every moment when Daniel had seemed on the verge of saying something. Before pulling back, I recorded dates and times and exact words when I could remember them. I noted the week I had been in Ohio, the phone bill that had hidden this terrible secret, the signature that was not mine, but wore my name like a stolen coat. I hid the journal in a place Claire would never think to look, behind a loose board in the back of my closet, where Margaret used to keep her grandmother's jewelry. The hiding spot felt appropriate somehow. Margaret's secrets protecting mine, the power of attorney, gave Claire legal authority to make decisions on my behalf, to access my accounts, to sell my property. With this single piece of paper she could dismantle everything I had built, and she had my son's signature, making it all look legitimate. I returned the phone bill to the gap behind the cabinet, leaving everything exactly as I had found it let. Claire believed her secrets were still safe. Let her think the old man suspected nothing. My signature was forged, but it was my son's hand that made the lie look real. Did he know? Or was he just another tool in her workshop? I kept my discovery buried for 2 weeks, watching Claire with new eyes, while pretending nothing had changed. She moved through my house with the confidence of someone who believed. Her victory was already complete. I let her believe it. I smiled when she suggested changes to my schedule, nodded when she explained why certain decisions needed to be made without consulting me, played the role of the declining old man she needed me to be. All the while I watched and listened and wrote everything down in the journal, hidden behind Margaret's loose board. The truth revealed itself on a Thursday afternoon. Claire thought I was napping in my room, which had become my habit after lunch. Another small surrender she had orchestrated to keep me out of her way during the productive hours of the day. But I had not been sleeping well since finding that document, and on this particular afternoon I came downstairs for a glass of water, moving quietly in my socks, the way I had learned to move in. My own home. Claire was in the kitchen, her back to the doorway, phone pressed against her ear. She spoke in the low, confident tone of someone conducting business, unaware that the walls had grown ears. "Once we liquidate the house, we'll have enough to start fresh." She said the market's strong right now, and the property's worth more than he realizes. We need to move quickly before he starts asking questions. A pause, while she listened to whoever was on the other end. Then she laughed, a sound I had once found charming, but now recognized as something colder. "He doesn't even know what he's signing half the time, honestly. It's almost too easy." I pressed myself against the wall of the hallway, heart hammering, afraid she would hear the blood rushing through my veins. She continued talking, discussing timelines and paperwork and the importance of keeping everything looking legitimate. I heard my own name, spoken like a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. This was not about money. Money was merely the mechanism. What Claire wanted was control, complete and absolute. The kind of power that could only exist once I had been reduced to nothing. When I heard her footsteps approaching the hallway, I retreated silently back up the stairs and closed my bedroom door without a sound. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, letting the full weight of her words settle over me like a shroud. My first instinct was confrontation. I wanted to march downstairs and throw the forged power of attorney in her face, demand explanations, force Daniel to choose between his wife and his father. But I had spent 68 years learning that first instincts are often the most dangerous ones. Confrontation would accomplish nothing except to alert Claire that I knew her game. She would deny everything, paint me as confused and paranoid. And Daniel would believe her because Daniel always believed her. I would lose my son and my home. In one reckless moment, no. I would not fight with emotion. I would fight with truth. Your carefully gathered and strategically deployed patience had never come naturally to me. But Margaret used to say that patience was simply wisdom, waiting for the right moment. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would be ready the next morning. I told Claire I was going for a walk around the neighborhood. She barely looked up from her laptop, already absorbed in whatever schemes required her attention. I walked out the front door and crossed the street to Eleanor Wright's house, the first time I had visited since we buried Margaret 3 years ago. Eleanor opened the door before I could knock, as if she had been watching from the window. She was 70 years old, white-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a cardigan that Margaret had knitted for her birthday. A decade ago, she looked at me for a long moment, studying my face the way she used to study her students' essays when she taught high school English. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. "Come in, Douglas," she said. "I've been expecting you." We sat in her living room, surrounded by photographs and books and the accumulated evidence of a life well lived. She poured tea without asking if I wanted any, and I accepted it without protest. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have known each other long enough that words are sometimes unnecessary. Finally, Eleanor set down her cup and met my eyes. "Margaret told me you'd come eventually. She said you'd only come when you were ready to listen." The words hit me like a physical blow. Ready to listen to what? Eleanor's expression softened, but there was steel beneath the sympathy. "Not yet," she said. "First, let her make her move, Claire. Let her show her whole hand. Then I'll show you what your wife left behind." I wanted to demand answers immediately, to insist she tell me everything right now, but something in Eleanor's tone stopped me. She was not being cruel or evasive. She was following instructions the same way. Margaret had always given instructions with purpose and precision. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Long enough," she said. Margaret saw things clearly, even when she was sick. Especially when she was sick, she knew this day would come, and she prepared for it. The only question was whether you would be ready when it arrived. I left Eleanor's house an hour later, my mind churning with questions I could not yet answer. Margaret had seen Claire for what she was. Margaret had prepared something, and Eleanor had been guarding that secret all along. Eleanor knew something. My wife had told her something, and whatever it was, it had been waiting for this exact moment. The day Claire chose for her public performance arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of bright morning that draws people out of their houses and into their yards. I understood later that this was no accident. Claire planned everything, including the weather's role in ensuring maximum visibility for what she intended to present as a family decision made with love and concern. The moving truck returned at 9. Idro larger than before, accompanied by a crew of 6 men in matching uniforms. Claire had dressed for the occasion in a soft blue blouse and pressed slacks. Her hair styled her makeup, subtle but deliberate. She looked like a woman from a magazine advertisement, the kind of daughter-in-law any parent would be grateful to have. The costume was perfect. Neighbors began gathering within the hour. Mrs. Patterson, from 3 doors down, stopped her morning walk to watch the Hendersons pause their gardening and drifted toward the property line. The young couple who had moved in last year stood on their porch with coffee cups in hand, observing the spectacle with the detached curiosity of people watching a television drama unfold in real life. By noon, a small crowd had assembled along the sidewalk and across the street, pretending to tend lawns and check mailboxes while keeping their eyes fixed on my house. Claire moved among them like a politician working a crowd. I watched from the front lawn as she approached each cluster of neighbors, touching arms, lowering her voice to a confidential murmur, shaking her head with practiced sorrow. I could not hear every word, but I caught enough. "We're just helping Dad transition to assisted living," she told Mrs. Patterson loud enough for others to overhear. "It's what's best for him at this stage. The house is too much for one person and we worry about him being alone. You understand?" Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically, glancing at me with eyes full of pity. "Of course, dear, you're doing the right thing. It must be so difficult." "It is," Claire said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she had produced from nowhere. "But family takes care of family. That's what Margaret would have wanted." The invocation of my dead wife's name hit me like a blow to the chest. Claire had never known Margaret. Not really. She had known only the version of Margaret that existed in the final years, diminished by illness, softened by approaching death. She had no right to speak for what Margaret would have wanted, but I said nothing. I stood on my own lawn, surrounded by the detritus of my life, being loaded into a truck, and I kept my silence. Some neighbors avoided my gaze entirely, embarrassed to witness what they perceived as the sad decline of a man they had known for decades. Others whispered to each other behind cupped hands, no doubt discussing whether I had agreed to this or whether I was too far gone to resist. I heard fragments of their speculation, carried on the breeze. "Such a shame. He's not been right since Margaret passed. At least Claire is taking responsibility." Daniel stood beside his wife throughout the morning, a silent shadow in her performance. He held clipboards when she handed them to him, pointed movers toward rooms when she directed him to nod it along with. Her conversations without contributing words of his own, but he never looked at the neighbors. He never looked at me. His eyes remained fixed on the ground, on the truck, on anything that was not a human face requiring acknowledgement. I recognized shame when I saw it. The question was whether he felt shame for what he was doing or merely for being seen doing it. The afternoon sun had begun its descent. When Eleanor emerged from her house, she walked across the street with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had spent 70 years learning that patience was its own form of power. Claire noticed her approach immediately. I saw my daughter-in-law's shoulders tense, her smile faltering for just a moment before she reassembled her expression into something welcoming. Eleanor ignored her entirely. She walked past the movers, past the gawking neighbors, past Daniel with his downcast eyes, and stopped directly in front of me. We stood face to face on the lawn where Margaret and I had once hosted barbecues and birthday parties, where Daniel had learned to throw a football, where 40 years of memories were now being carried away in cardboard boxes. Eleanor leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. Let her believe she's won tonight. Come to my house. Bring nothing but yourself. Then she stepped back and her entire demeanor shifted. She turned to face Claire with a smile that did not reach her eyes, the kind of smile that teachers give to students they have already decided to fail. Take care of him, dear, Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the lawn for everyone to hear. I know how much you care about family. The words were innocent enough, but Claire heard something beneath them, a frequency only predators can detect. Her smile flickered. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She sensed danger without being able to identify its source, like an animal catching a scent on the wind. Of course, Claire managed. Douglas is lucky to have so many people who love him. Eleanor held her gaze for one beat too long, then turned and walked back across the street without another word. I watched Claire watch her go, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw uncertainty flicker across my daughter-in-law's carefully constructed face. The whole neighborhood watched me lose my home. Only one person there knew the truth, and she had been waiting longer than anyone that night I crossed the street to. Eleanor's house, as instructed, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of everything I had witnessed. Eleanor welcomed me without questions, showed me to the guest room she had prepared, and told me to rest. I didn't sleep. I lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of a house that was not my own, wondering how my life had collapsed so completely in such a short span of time. The knock came the following evening, just as the sun was setting behind the trees. Eleanor answered the door, and I heard voices in the hallway, one of them achingly familiar. A moment later, Daniel appeared in the doorway of the living room, where I sat, waiting. I barely recognized my son. The man standing before me looked like a sketch of Daniel, all the color drained away, the lines too sharp where they should have been soft. He had lost weight enough that his shirt hung loose on his frame, dark circles carved hollows beneath his eyes, and those eyes themselves were red-rimmed, bloodshot. The eyes of someone who had not slept properly in weeks, or perhaps months. He stood in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he had permission to enter a stranger in the presence of his own father. "Can we talk?" his voice. It cracked on the second word alone. Eleanor excused herself without comment, retreating to the kitchen with the quiet discretion of someone who understood that some conversations required privacy. I gestured to the chair across from me, and Daniel lowered himself into it like a man twice his age, his movements heavy with exhaustion. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I studied my son's face, searching for the boy I had raised, the young man who had climbed oak trees and carved his initials into porch railings. He was still there, buried beneath layers of fatigue and something darker. Something that looked like years of accumulated guilt. "Dad," he began, then stopped, his hands twisted in his lap, fingers interlacing and separating in nervous patterns. "I need you to know something. I should have said this long time ago, but I was afraid, and then I thought it didn't matter anymore." But now he broke off again, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge words that had become stuck somewhere in his throat. I waited. Patience, Margaret used to say. Let people arrive at their truth in their own time. Daniel took a breath that shuddered through his entire body 2 years ago. "I tried to reach you. I sent you tone. I tried to tell you about Claire, about what she was planning, what she was doing. I found documents in her desk, paperwork, about the house, about your accounts. I was scared, Dad. I didn't know what to do, so I wrote to you. I told you everything." He looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw the ghost of a wound that had never healed. "But you never answered." I waited for days, then weeks. Nothing. I thought his voice dropped to barely a whisper. I thought you didn't care. I thought you read what I wrote and decided to ignore it. I thought you chose her side, or maybe you just didn't want to deal with it. I thought you had abandoned me. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. Daniel, I never received anything from you. No call, no letter, no message, nothing. I would have answered. I would have come to you immediately. You have to know that Daniel's face went pale. The color that remained drained away, leaving him looking almost grey in the fading evening light. That's impossible. I sent an email. I remember sending it. I checked a dozen times to make sure it went through. His voice was rising now, touched with panic. She told me you read it. Claire said she saw the notification on your computer that it had been opened. She said you must have decided not to respond, that you were probably too proud to admit there was a problem. Understanding crashed over me like a wave breaking against rocks. The passwords Claire had changed the email account she had insisted on managing, for to me the computer she monitored under the guise of protecting me from scammers, she deleted it. I said the words came out flat certain. Claire deleted your message before I ever saw it. Daniel stared at me. I watched realization dawn across his features, followed immediately by horror. Followed by something that looked like the foundation of his entire world, cracking beneath his feet. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged for 2 years. He had carried the belief that his father had rejected his cry for help for 2 years. Claire had let him carry that weight, had perhaps even nurtured it, using his sense of abandonment to bind him more tightly to her. His phone shattered the silence, buzzing insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. I did not need to see the name to know who was calling. His entire body changed when he saw its shoulders curling inward, spine bending as if preparing to receive a blow. I have to go, he said, and his voice had gone hollow. He stood, but paused at the doorway, turning back to look at me one final time. Check your old email, Dad. Check everything. The account you used before she changed the passwords. There might be backups. Record something. Then he was gone, walking out into the evening with his shoulders slumped like a man carrying invisible chains. I sat alone in Eleanor's living room as darkness gathered outside the windows, turning over what my son had told me. He had tried to warn me. He had reached out for help, taken a risk, trusted his father to protect him, and someone had made sure I never heard him. My son had tried to warn me. Someone made sure I never heard him, and for 2 years. He believed I had abandoned him. First, Eleanor found me still sitting in the same chair, an hour after Daniel left, staring at the wall without seeing it. She moved through the room quietly, turning on lamps against the gathering darkness before settling into the seat my son had occupied for a while. She simply sat with me in silence, 2 old people sharing the weight of revelations neither of us had. Unchosen, he came to you. She finally said it was not a question. He tried to warn me 2 years ago. An email. She deleted it before I ever saw it. Eleanor nodded slowly as if this information confirmed something she had long suspected. Claire is thorough. I'll give her that. She thinks of everything. She paused, her fingers drumming lightly against the armrest. Almost everything she rose and disappeared into. The back of the house. I heard drawers opening and closing, the sound of something heavy being moved. When she returned, she carried an old wooden box, dark with age, its brass hinges tarnished by time. She placed it on the coffee table between us, with the care of someone handling something precious. Margaret gave me this 5 years ago, Eleanor said, resting her hands on the lid, but not yet opening it. She made me promise not to open it until you came asking. Those were her exact words, until Douglas comes asking. Eleanor looked at me with eyes that held decades of friendship, of shared secrets, of promises kept through years of waiting. You're asking now? She lifted the lid. Inside, the box was filled with papers, folders, documents arranged with the meticulous organization that had always been Margaret's. Hallmark on top of everything sat a cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in handwriting. I would have recognized anywhere before I give you this. Eleanor said, "You need to understand how it came to be here." She settled back into her chair and began to speak. And as she spoke, the last 3 years of confusion began to resolve into terrible clarity 5 years ago while Margaret was still healthy, still sharp, still. The woman I had loved for 4 decades, she began noticing things about Claire that troubled her, small things at first, the kind of details that most people overlook. She noticed how Claire had systematically isolated Daniel from his college friends, how old relationships had withered and died. Since the marriage, she noticed how Claire controlled the flow of information in their household, how Daniel rarely knew about family events until Claire chose to tell him how he had stopped making decisions without consulting his wife first. Most disturbing of all, Margaret noticed how Claire spoke about our assets, questions that seemed innocent enough on the surface, inquiries about property values and retirement accounts and the structure of our family trust. But Margaret had grown up poor, had learned to recognize hunger in all its forms, and she recognized something in Claire's interest that went beyond casual curiosity. She came to me, Eleanor continued, sat right where you're sitting now, and told me everything she had observed. She said she hoped she was wrong, prayed she was being paranoid, but Margaret was never paranoid. She was careful. She saw patterns that others missed. Together, Margaret and Eleanor had consulted an estate attorney named Samuel Green, a man Eleanor had known for 30 years, whose discretion could be trusted absolutely. They reviewed the family trust that Margaret and I had established 2 decades earlier, and they found it wanting. The original document had been designed to protect assets from taxes and probate, not from predators within the family itself. Samuel Green helped them draft amendments. New clauses were added, protective measures that would prevent any major decisions regarding family assets without the explicit approval of the trustee. The house could not be sold without Samuel's signature, accounts could not be drained. Without his authorization, a fortress of legal language was constructed around everything Margaret and I had. Built together invisible walls that Claire would not discover until she tried to breach them. Margaret signed the amendments a month before she got sick. Eleanor said it was like she knew time was running out. She brought me this box and made me swear to keep it safe. She said Claire would make her move eventually, and when she did, you would need proof. Eleanor reached into the box and withdrew the cream-colored envelope, holding it out to me. This is the last thing she wrote before the diagnosis. She wanted you to have it. When the time came, I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name stared up at me in Margaret's elegant script, each letter formed with the precision she brought to everything she did. I ran my thumb across the paper, half expecting to feel some trace of her still lingering. "In the fibers she loved you more than you know," Eleanor said softly. She spent her last healthy months building protections. You would never see fighting battles you didn't know existed. That was Margaret. She never wanted credit for the hard things. She just wanted you safe. I looked at the envelope, then at the box full of documents, then at Eleanor, this woman who had kept my wife's secrets for half a decade, waiting for a moment she hoped would never arrive. Why didn't she just tell me? The question came out broken, rough, with emotion I could not suppress. Eleanor smiled sadly, because she knew you. She knew you would confront Claire directly, try to fix things with honesty and conversation, and she knew that wouldn't work. Claire isn't someone who can be reasoned with. She can only be outmaneuvered. Margaret understood that she did what had to be done, and she trusted me to hold the evidence until you were ready to use it. I clutched the envelope against my chest, feeling the presence of my wife reaching across the years that separated us. She had seen this coming, she had prepared for it, and she had loved me enough to protect me, even after death had taken her beyond my reach. My wife did not just love me, she built a fortress around our family from beyond the grave, and she chose her best friend to guard the gate. Eleanor left me alone with the letter. understanding without being told that some moments require solitude. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, heard the soft click of her bedroom door closing, and then there was only silence and the weight of the envelope in my hands. I sat in the lamplight for a long time before finding the courage to open it. The envelope had yellowed slightly with age, but the seal remained intact. Waiting 5 years for this exact moment, Margaret had touched this paper, had folded these creases, had written my name with her own hand opening. It felt like disturbing something sacred. Finally, I slid my finger beneath the flap and withdrew the pages. Inside, 3 sheets of cream-colored stationery covered front and back with Margaret's careful handwriting. I took a breath, I steadied myself, and began to read my dearest Douglas. The letter began, and immediately I heard her voice, clear and warm, as if she were sitting beside me. If you are reading this, then what I feared has come to pass. I'm sorry I could not tell you while I was here. You would have tried to fix it yourself, and some things cannot be fixed. They can only be prepared for. I have watched Claire for 3 years now, since the day Daniel first brought her home. I wanted to like her. I wanted to believe she was everything our son deserved, but I've learned to trust my instincts, Douglas, and my instincts have been screaming warnings that I could not ignore. She went on to describe what she had observed, details I had missed entirely or dismissed as unimportant, the way Claire looked at our house with calculation rather than warmth, her eyes measuring square footage rather than admiring the home we had built. The probing questions about finances that always seemed casual but followed patterns too deliberate to be coincidental. How much is the property worth? Now what happens to the trust if something happens to one of you? Have you thought about simplifying your estate, most painful of all? Margaret wrote about Daniel. She described watching our son transform over the years of his marriage, becoming smaller, somehow more hesitant, more dependent on Claire's approval for even minor decisions. The confident young man who had once debated politics at our dinner table now looked to his wife. Before expressing any opinion, the boy who had climbed trees and dreamed of adventures had become someone who asked permission to visit his own parents. She is not a monster, Douglas. I need you to understand that Claire is a person who learned somewhere, somehow, that control is love. Someone in her past taught her that security comes from managing everything and everyone around her. It does not excuse what she has done, but it explains her. She is not acting from cruelty. She is acting from fear, the kind of fear that consumes everything it touches. I paused in my reading, struck by the compassion in Margaret's words, even as she documented Claire's betrayal. This was my wife, as I had always known her, fierce in protection, but never in hatred, capable of seeing the humanity in those who would harm her. Family, even in warning me. She refused to demonize the woman who threatened everything we had built. The letter continued with instructions practical and precise. She told me about Samuel Green, about the amendments to the trust, about the documents Eleanor had been holding. She explained what Claire would likely try and how the legal protections would stop her. Every contingency had been considered, every possibility anticipated. Margaret had spent her final healthy months constructing a defense I would not need until years after her death. Then the tone shifted, becoming softer, more personal. Do not hate Daniel. I know this will be hard. I know you will feel betrayed by his silence, by whatever role he has played in Claire's schemes, but our son is lost. Douglas, he is lost in her shadow, trapped in a marriage that has slowly erased everything he used to be. He loves you even if he does not remember how to show it. Help him find his way back, but do not sacrifice yourself doing it. You cannot save someone who refuses to be saved. You can only leave the door open and hope they eventually walk through it. About Eleanor, she is the sister I chose, the friend who has known my heart for 50 years. Trust her. As you trust me, she will not fail you. She has been carrying this burden alone since I asked her to, and she has never wavered. Whatever you need, whatever happens next, Eleanor will stand beside you. The final paragraph blurred before my eyes, as tears I had not known I was holding finally broke free. I wish I could be there with you, my love. I wish I could hold your hand through what is coming. But since I cannot, I have done the only thing I could. I have given you the truth, the tools, and the people you need to protect yourself. Use them, fight for our home, for our family, for everything we built together. And when it is over, when you have one plant, something in the garden for me, something that blooms every spring, so I can remind you year after year that love does not end, it only changes form forever. Yours, Margaret. I sat in Eleanor's living room and wept, not the sharp grief of loss, not the hollow ache of absence, but something different, something I had not expected. I wept with gratitude, with awe, with love so profound it felt like drowning and flying at the same time. My wife had seen everything. She had known me better than I knew myself, known my weaknesses and my blind spots, and she had worked around them to keep me safe. 3 years I had spent believing she left me unprepared. 3 years I had stumbled through widowhood thinking I faced the future alone, and all along she had been there, her love translated into legal documents and trusted friends, and a letter waiting for the moment I would need it most. She knew me better than I knew myself. She prepared for a war I did not even see coming, and now it is my turn to finish what she started the next morning. Eleanor drove me to an office building on the outskirts of town, a modest brick structure that housed 3 law practices and an accounting firm. Samuel Green's name was painted in gold letters on a second-floor window, the lettering understated, the kind of quiet professionalism that does not need to announce itself. Samuel himself matched his office. He was 60 years old, grey at the temples, with the measured demeanor of a man who had spent decades separating emotion from fact. He rose to greet us when we entered, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, professional but not cold. His eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, the eyes of someone who missed nothing and forgot even less. Douglas, he said. Gesturing to the chairs arranged before his desk, Margaret spoke of you often. I'm sorry, we're meeting under these circumstances. I settled into the offered seat, while Eleanor took the chair beside me. Samuel's office was lined with bookshelves, legal volumes, arranged with military precision, everything in its proper place. A single photograph sat on his desk, showing a younger Samuel with a woman I assumed was his wife. Both of them smiling in front of a mountain backdrop. The personal touch humanized the otherwise formal space. Eleanor has briefed me on recent developments. Samuel continued, opening a folder that lay waiting on his desk. The moving trucks, the forged power of attorney, the deleted email. Before we discuss strategy, I need to make sure you understand exactly where things stand legally. He pulled a document from the folder and turned it so I could see it was the trust amendment Margaret had signed 5 years ago, her signature at the bottom, as familiar to me as my own face. The house you built in 1982 belongs to the Fairchild Family Trust. Samuel explained, his voice measured and clear. Not to you personally, not to Daniel, and certainly not to Claire. The trust owns the property. You are the beneficiary, which means you have the right to live there, but you cannot sell it, transfer it, or leverage it without trustee approval. He paused, meeting my eyes. I am the trustee. Margaret appointed me 5 years ago, specifically for this purpose. The implications settled over me slowly. So when Claire tried to prepare the house for sale, she was attempting to sell something she had no legal authority to touch. Samuel finished. The power of attorney she forged might have given her control over your personal accounts, your medical decisions, your day-to-day affairs, but it's worthless against trust property. She's been waving around a weapon that can't even fire. Relief washed through me, tempered immediately by the memory of everything Claire had already taken: my dignity, my son, the peace of my final years. The house might be protected, but the damage she had inflicted went far beyond property. Samuel seemed to read my thoughts that said, forgery is still a serious crime, a Class C felony in this state, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. If you want to press charges, we have more than enough evidence to build a criminal case, the forged signature, the witness attestation, the timeline, proving you were out of state when the document was supposedly signed. Any prosecutor would take this to trial. I thought of Daniel in a courtroom called to testify against his own wife. I thought of him sitting in a witness box, being forced to admit that he had signed papers without reading them, that his trust in Claire had been weaponized against his father. The image made my stomach turn. If we go to trial, I said slowly, Daniel would have to testify. Samuel nodded. He signed as witness to the forgery. His testimony would be central to the prosecution's case. I can't do that to him. The words came out before I had fully formed the thought. He's been manipulated, used. Putting him on the stand would destroy whatever chance we have of rebuilding our relationship. Eleanor reached over and squeezed my hand. She understood. She had known Margaret's heart, and Margaret's heart had always prioritized family over justice. Samuel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. There is another option. Civil resolution. We call a meeting with Claire, present the evidence and give her a choice. She signs a legally binding agreement, relinquishing all claims to Fairchild family assets, agrees to leave the state within 30 days, and this matter stays out of criminal court. If she refuses, we forward everything to the district attorney and let the justice system take its course. You think she'll agree to that? Most people do when they see their own signatures on fraudulent documents. Samuel said. Claire is calculating. She'll weigh her options and realize that a quiet departure is preferable to a public. Prosecution pride is a powerful motivator, but self-preservation is stronger. I considered the plan, turning it over in my mind the way I used to turn over architectural problems, examining it from every angle for weaknesses. It was elegant in its simplicity. We were not asking Claire to admit wrongdoing. We were simply offering her an exit before the walls closed in completely. Do it, I said. Arrange the meeting. Samuel nodded and made a note in the folder. I'll draft the invitation and send it tomorrow. We'll schedule the meeting for next week. Give her time to consult her own attorney if she chooses. Eleanor will be present as a witness. I recommend we hold it here on neutral ground. As we rose to leave, Samuel extended his hand once more. Margaret chose. Well, he said, she told me you would hesitate to. Daniel, even after everything she said, your compassion was both your greatest strength and your greatest vulnerability. But she also said that when the moment came, you would do what needed to be done. I gripped his hand, feeling the weight of my wife's faith in me, the responsibility of finishing what she had started. Claire thought she was fighting an old man she was about to discover she had been fighting a dead woman's love and a legal wall she could not see that evening. I returned to Eleanor's house with Samuel's words echoing in my mind. The meeting was scheduled, the trap was set, but there was one more piece of evidence I needed to find, one final confirmation of what I already knew in my heart, but needed to see with my own eyes. Eleanor had left Margaret's wooden box on the guest room desk. Understanding that I might need to examine its contents more thoroughly, I lifted the lid and carefully removed the documents, setting aside the trust amendments and legal correspondence, until I found what I was looking for. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a small cloth pouch, was a USB drive. A piece of masking tape on its side bore Margaret's handwriting, email backups 2018-2-22. I borrowed Eleanor's laptop and inserted the drive. The files were organized by year and month, thousands of emails archived with Margaret's characteristic precision. She had been backing up our family email account for years, saving copies that existed independent of whatever Claire might do to the live system. Even in this small detail, my wife had thought ahead. I navigated to the folder marked with the year Daniel had told me about, then narrowed my search to the month. The files were sorted by date. I scrolled slowly, reading subject lines, searching for anything from my son's email address. My hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. Part of me was afraid of what I might find. Part of me was afraid of what it would mean if I found nothing at all. Then I saw an email, dated March 15th, 2 years ago. The sender was Daniel Fairchild, the address my son had used since college. The subject line stopped my breath in my chest. "Dad, please read this." I clicked on the file. The email opened and Daniel's words filled the screen, each sentence a wound I had not known existed until this moment. "Dad, I don't know how to say this. I've been trying to find the courage for weeks, but every time I start to speak, something stops me. So I'm writing instead because maybe that's easier. Maybe if I put it in words, I can finally make you understand. Claire is planning something. I don't know exactly what, but I'm scared. I found papers in her drawer last week, documents about the house, about your bank accounts. There were notes in her handwriting, calculations. I didn't understand. She talks to someone on the phone. Sometimes late at night when she thinks I'm asleep, a lawyer. I think they discuss transitioning assets and establishing control and other phrases that make my skin crawl." I paused, unable to continue for a moment. The words blurred before my eyes as I imagined my son writing this alone and frightened, reaching out to the one person he believed could help. "I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared of what she'll do if she finds out. I'm telling you, she monitors everything she knows. My passwords, checks my phone, reads my messages. I'm sending this from my work computer during lunch, because it's the only place she can't see. Please don't reply to this email. She might intercept it. Call me at work instead. The number is the same as it's always been. I need to hear your voice, Dad. I need to know you're still there. I need to know I haven't lost you too. I love you. I'm sorry I haven't said that enough. I'm sorry for everything, Daniel." I sat motionless before the screen, reading the email again and again, each word carving itself deeper into my memory. My son had been terrified. He had gathered his courage, taken an enormous risk, and reached out for help. He had trusted me to save him. And I had never answered. I checked the email's metadata, the technical information that recorded every action taken on the message. The timestamp showed it had been sent at 12:47 p.m. on March 15th. At 12:51 p.m. 4 minutes later, it was marked as read at 12:52 p.m. It was moved to the trash folder at 12:53 p.m. The trash was emptied. Someone had opened my email, read my son's desperate plea, and erased it from existence in less than 6 minutes. I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app, scrolling back through years of appointments until I found March 15th. The entry was still there, preserved in Digital Amber Hospital Checkup 11. 0 a.m. I remembered that day now, a routine examination that had taken longer than expected. I had not returned home until after 2. 0. Claire had been alone in the house all morning, alone with my computer, my email, my son's cry for help. The mathematics of betrayal assembled themselves before me with terrible clarity. Claire had been monitoring my email, waiting for exactly this kind of communication. When Daniel's message arrived, she had pounced on it immediately, reading it, deleting it, and erasing all evidence of its existence. Before I could return home, then she had told Daniel that I had read his email and chosen not to respond. For 2 years, my son had lived with the belief that his father had seen his fear, heard his plea, and turned away in silence. For 2 years, he had carried that rejection like a stone in his chest, letting it poison every interaction between us, every awkward dinner, every avoided conversation, every moment when he seemed to pull away from me now made perfect sense. He was not choosing Claire over me. He was protecting himself from a father he believed had already abandoned him. The cruelty of it staggered me. Claire had not simply stolen from me. She had stolen my son's faith in his father. She had taken the bond between parent and child and twisted it into a weapon, using Daniel's love against him. Using my silence, a silence I had never chosen, to cement her control. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of Eleanor's guest room. The USB drive clutched in my hand like a talisman. The evidence was complete now. The picture was clear. Everything I needed for the confrontation ahead was assembled and ready for 2 years. My son believed I had read his cry for help and chosen silence for 2 years. He carried that rejection alone. The woman who claimed to love him had stolen his voice and turned his father into a ghost. I learned what happened next from 2 sources: Eleanor, who witnessed Claire's visit firsthand, and Daniel, who called me the following day with a voice I barely recognized. Between their accounts, I was able to piece together the unraveling of the woman who had tried to destroy me. Samuel's letter arrived at Claire's house on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor had positioned herself by her front window, watching through lace curtains. As the mail carrier made his rounds, she saw Claire retrieve the envelope from the mailbox. Saw her tear it open. While still standing in the driveway, I saw the color drain from her face. As she read the contents, the letter was formal, professional. Devastating. In its brevity, Fairchild Family Trust. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting required." Samuel had crafted every word with precision, revealing just enough to terrify without providing anything Claire could use to prepare a defense. The letter mentioned the trust, the trustee, the need to discuss irregularities in recent documentation. It named a date, a time, a location, according to Daniel. Claire spent the next hour on the phone with her own attorney, a man she had retained months ago to help with what she called estate planning. Daniel heard fragments of the conversation through the closed door of her home office. Her voice started confident, then confused, then increasingly shrill. "What do you mean there's a trust? The deed is in his name. I've seen the deed." Silence while the lawyer explained, "That's impossible. We had the power of attorney." He signed everything. More silence, then quieter, more desperate. "What do you mean?" "It doesn't matter." When she emerged from the office, Daniel told me she looked like someone who had seen a ghost. The foundations of her plan, so carefully laid over years of manipulation, had revealed themselves to be built on sand. The house she thought she had stolen was never hers. To take the documents she had forged were worthless against legal walls she had not known existed. Daniel said she tried to act normal that evening, preparing dinner, making small talk about the weather and weekend plans, but her eyes kept drifting, her attention fracturing. She dropped a glass in the kitchen and stared at the shards on the floor for a full minute before moving to clean them up. She began probing him for information, her questions casual on the surface but edged with urgency. "Beneath, you visited your father at Eleanor's, didn't you? What did you talk about? Did he mention anything about lawyers, about the house?" Daniel gave her nothing. One word, answers, shrugs, averted eyes. He told me he had practiced. This had rehearsed the conversation in his mind, knowing it would come. "What's wrong with you?" She finally demanded, frustration breaking through her careful composure. "Nothing," Daniel said. "I'm just tired." But Claire knew she knew something had shifted. Some crucial piece of her machinery had slipped out of alignment. Daniel had always been transparent to her, easy to read, easier to control. Now he had become opaque, his thoughts hidden behind a wall she could not breach. The next afternoon, Eleanor heard a car pull into her driveway. She was expecting it. We both were from the guest room window. I watched Claire emerge from her vehicle. Her movements sharp, with barely contained agitation. She marched up the walkway and rang the doorbell with the aggressive insistence of someone accustomed to getting what she demanded. Eleanor opened the door with a serene smile, the kind of smile that reveals nothing and suggests everything. I remained upstairs listening, though I could not hear the exact words exchanged. Eleanor told me later that Claire demanded to see me. Her voice pitched high with desperation, dressed as authority. "Douglas doesn't wish to speak with you," Eleanor replied calmly. "He'll see you at the meeting with Samuel, with everyone who needs to be there." Claire tried to push past her, but Eleanor, 70 years old and half Claire's size, did not move. She simply stood in the doorway, like a stone, pleasant and immovable, until Claire finally stepped back. "You can't do this," Claire said, I'm his family, you're just a neighbor. Eleanor's smile never wavered. Family is not always blood, dear. Sometimes it's the people who show up when blood fails you. The door closed gently but firmly through. The window, I watched Claire stand on Eleanor's porch for a long moment, frozen, staring at the painted wood, as if she could will it to open through sheer force of need. Then she turned and walked back to her car. Her steps slower than before, her shoulders slightly hunched. She had spent 8 years building the perfect trap. She did not realize she was standing inside someone else's all along, and the walls were closing in. The day of the meeting arrived, with the kind of grey, overcast sky that seemed to understand the gravity of what was about to unfold. Eleanor drove me to Samuel's office. Neither of us speaking during the short journey. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered would be said in that room. Samuel had arranged the space with deliberate care. 5 chairs formed a loose semicircle facing his desk position so that everyone could see everyone else. Late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the carpet. A pitcher of water and several glasses sat untouched on a side table. The room smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish, the scent of serious business conducted in quiet spaces. I arrived first, taking my seat to Samuel's left. Eleanor settled beside me, her presence a steady anchor against the storm to come. We waited in silence, watching the door, listening to the muffled sounds of the building settling around us. Claire entered next, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, with a confidence that did not quite reach her eyes. She had dressed carefully, professionally, armor constructed from expensive fabric and perfect makeup, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface, the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped her handbag just a little too tightly. She took her seat without greeting anyone, her spine rigid, her gaze fixed on some point beyond Samuel's head. Daniel came last, and the distance he chose spoke louder than any words. Instead of sitting beside his wife, he selected the chair farthest from her, leaving an empty seat between them, like a chasm that had been growing for years and was only now becoming visible. Claire noticed her head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing, but Daniel would not look at her. He stared at the floor, at his hands, at anything that was not his wife's face. Samuel waited until everyone was settled, then rose and closed the door with a soft click that seemed to seal us all. Inside, he returned to his desk and opened a folder that had been waiting there, its contents arranged with the precision I had come to expect from him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm, professional, betraying nothing. "I've asked you here to discuss matters pertaining to the Fairchild Family Trust and certain irregularities that have come to my attention." He lifted the first document from the folder and placed it on the desk where everyone could see. "This is the trust deed, amended 5 years ago by Margaret Fairchild. It establishes that the family home on Maple Street is held in trust with myself as trustee under the terms of this document. No major decisions regarding the property, including sale or transfer, can be made without my explicit approval." Claire's composure flickered. I watched her absorb the information, watched her realize that the ground she had built her plans upon had never been solid. Samuel placed the second document beside the first. "This is a general power of attorney dated 3 months ago, bearing Douglas Fairchild's signature. According to this document, Douglas granted Claire Fairchild broad authority over his financial and legal affairs." He paused, letting the silence stretch, however. Douglas was not in this state on the date this document claims to have been signed. He was visiting his sister in Ohio, a fact supported by travel records, photographs, and multiple witnesses. The signature on this document is a forgery. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but Samuel continued before she could form words. He placed the third document on the desk, and this time his eyes moved to Daniel. This is the witness attestation on the forged power of attorney. The signature belongs to Daniel Fairchild. A witness signature certifies that the signatory observed the principal signing the document of their own free will. Samuel's voice remained steady, almost gentle. "Daniel, did you observe your father signing this document?" Daniel's voice was barely audible. "No, I signed papers Claire gave me. She said they were routine insurance documents." The fourth and final document landed on the desk like a verdict. This is a print out of an email sent 2 years ago from Daniel Fairchild to his father. The subject line reads, "Dad, please read this." The email contains a detailed warning about Claire's activities and a plea for help. Samuel turned the page to show the metadata this email was. Opened 4 minutes after it was sent, then deleted and permanently erased. Douglas was at a hospital appointment at the time. Claire was alone in the house with access to his computer. The room was silent. I could hear Claire breathing shallow and quick, the sound of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. Samuel closed the folder and folded his hands on his desk. "Mrs. Fairchild, you have 2 options. Option 1, sign an agreement relinquishing all claims to Fairchild. Family assets leave this state within 30 days. This matter remains civil and no criminal charges will be filed." He paused, letting the weight of the alternative settle over the room. Option 2. I forward this evidence to the district attorney's office. Forgery is a Class C felony in this state, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Additionally, evidence of the deleted email suggests a pattern of fraud and manipulation that could result in additional charges. Claire turned to Daniel, her mask finally crumbling. "Say something. Tell them this is ridiculous. Tell them I would never. Daniel, please, we're married. You know me." Daniel raised his head slowly and met his wife's eyes for the first time since entering the room. I saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been grief, or might have been relief, or might have been both. At once he said nothing. The silence stretched into seconds, then longer. Claire looked from Daniel to Samuel to Eleanor to me. Searching for an ally, finding none for 8 years, she had controlled every room she entered, manipulated every conversation, bent every person. 2. Her will. She had always controlled the room, but in that moment, for the first time, the room controlled her. The silence that followed Daniel's refusal to speak stretched into something unbearable. I watched Claire's face cycle through emotions like a storm, gathering strength, confusion, then disbelief, then the first cracks of genuine fear, but beneath all of that, rising like lava through fractured stone, came rage. "You think you're so righteous?" she said, her voice climbing in pitch, the careful modulation she had maintained for years, beginning to splinter, "all of you sitting there in judgment. You never wanted me in this family, not from the beginning. Neither did she, your precious Margaret, looking down her nose at me every holiday, every dinner, every single moment we were in the same room. I met her eyes and felt nothing but the calm that comes from finally understanding your enemy. You're right. I said, my voice steady. She didn't trust you, and she was right. Not to the words landed like a match thrown into dry kindling. Claire's composure, already crumbling, collapsed entirely. She turned on me with venom I had glimpsed before, but never seen fully unleashed. Margaret was a controlling, manipulative woman who couldn't stand to let anyone else have power. She poisoned this family against me from the start. And you, she jabbed a finger in my direction. You were always cold, distant. You never tried to know me, never asked about my life, my dreams. You just sat in your chair and judged me the way she did. She spun toward Eleanor. "And you, the loyal friend, the keeper of secrets, you've been waiting for this." "Haven't you? Waiting to destroy me? What kind of person holds on to ammunition for 5 years, just hoping for a chance to use it?" Eleanor did not flinch. She simply looked at Claire with the patient expression of someone who had seen tantrums before and knew they always burned themselves out, finding no purchase there. Claire turned finally to Daniel, her husband, the man she had controlled for 8 years. through manipulation and manufactured isolation. When she spoke to him, her voice dropped to something that was almost pleading, though the anger still simmered beneath Daniel. "You can't seriously be taking their side after everything I've done for you. I built our life, I managed our finances, I took care of your father when no one else would, and this is how you repay me, by sitting there like a coward." While they tear apart our marriage, Daniel remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Say something," Claire shrieked. "Defend me, defend us." Still nothing. The desperation curdled back into fury. Claire's face twisted, and what came next was the truth she had kept hidden beneath years of careful performance. "Daniel is pathetic." The words exploded from her like something long suppressed finally breaking. "I'm free. He can't do anything without me telling him what to do, what to think, what to feel. He's weak. He's always been weak. You raised a coward. Douglas, a spineless, gutless coward who couldn't stand up for himself if his life depended on it." The room went completely still. Even the ambient sounds of the building seemed to hold their breath. I watched my son's face as his wife's words washed over him. Watched something shift behind his eyes, something that had been dormant for years, finally stirring awake. Daniel stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, carrying a weight that made everyone in the room turn toward him. He didn't look at Claire. He walked past the empty chair between them, past Eleanor, past Samuel's desk, until he stood beside me. Then he turned to face the woman he had married. "I'm done." "Claire," his voice was quiet but steady, steadier than I had heard it in years. "You made me believe my father abandoned me for 2 years. I thought he read my email and chose not to answer. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I thought the one person who was supposed to protect me had turned his back, and you let me believe that. You watched me suffer and said nothing." Claire opened her mouth, but Daniel continued, his words gaining strength. "You put a pen in my hand and told me to sign routine papers. You used my trust against my own father. You deleted my cry for help and then convinced me that he didn't care enough to respond." His voice cracked slightly, but did not break. "For 8 years, you made me smaller and smaller. You cut me off from my friends, from my family, from myself. You made me forget who I was. But I remember now." He turned to me and I saw my son, my real son, looking back at me for the first time in longer than I could remember. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been stronger. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have fought harder." I rose from my chair and placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension there, the years of accumulated weight he had been carrying alone. "You're here now." I said, "That's enough." We stood together, father and son, united for the first time in years across the room. Claire looked from Daniel to me, then to Eleanor, then to Samuel. She was searching for something, an ally, an escape, a crack in the wall that had formed around her. She found nothing. Samuel slid the agreement across his desk toward the empty chair Claire had vacated. "Mrs. Fairchild, your decision." For a long moment, Claire did not move. I could see her calculating, searching for angles, for leverage, for any way to turn the situation to her advantage. But there was nothing left to manipulate. The evidence was undeniable. The allies she had counted on had evaporated. The husband she had controlled had finally broken free. She walked to the desk with stiff mechanical steps. She picked up Samuel's pen. Her hand trembled as she signed her name on the document, the signature shaky and small compared to the bold strokes I had seen on the forged power of attorney. Without a word, without a backward glance, she set down the pen and walked out of the room. Her heels clicked against the floor, growing fainter, until the outer door opened and closed. And then there was only silence. She walked out, the same way she had walked in 8 years ago alone. The difference was, this time she knew why. 3 months passed like water finding its way around stones, slowly reshaping the landscape of our lives. The house on Maple Street stood quiet again, returned to me by law and by right, though it took weeks before it felt like home rather than a battlefield. I moved back in on a Tuesday afternoon carrying Nothing but a small suitcase and the wooden box Margaret had left with Eleanor. The movers Claire had hired were long gone, and the furniture they had taken remained in a storage facility waiting for legal matters to be settled. I didn't mind the emptiness after everything that had happened. Silence felt like a gift. News of Claire's departure spread through town with the inevitable speed of small community gossip. She had 30 days to leave the state under the terms of the agreement, and she used every one of them, though not by choice. The consequences of her actions arrived faster than she could outrun them. Her employer learned of the situation first. Someone in Samuel's office knew someone who knew someone at the marketing firm where Claire had worked for 6 years. The details were vague, but damaging financial exploitation, forged documents, fraud against an elderly family member. No company wants that kind of association, and Claire was let go within a week. I took no pleasure in her professional destruction, but I could not pretend to feel sorry either. Her social circle collapsed next. The same networks that had carried news of her firing also carried whispers about the details. Friends who had once admired her ambition now avoided her calls. The book club stopped sending invitations. The gym partners found new schedules. Claire had built her local reputation on the image of a devoted wife and caring daughter-in-law. When that image shattered, so did everything constructed upon it. The final blow came from her own family. Her mother, a woman I had met only twice, called Daniel looking for answers. What she learned prompted her to make calls of her own, digging into her daughter's history. Apparently, this was not Claire's first manipulation. There had been incidents before: money borrowed and never repaid, relationships exploited and discarded, a pattern that stretched back years. Her family had chosen to overlook the warning signs. They could not overlook this. Claire returned to her hometown with nothing but her car and whatever she could fit inside it. I heard she was staying with a distant cousin, working part-time at a retail store, rebuilding a life from the ruins of the one she had tried to steal. Part of me wondered if she would learn anything from this experience, if consequence might teach what conscience had not. But that was no longer my concern. Daniel filed for divorce. The week after the meeting in Samuel's office, the process would take months, complicated by shared assets and the legal untangling of 8 years of marriage. But the decision itself was immediate and final. He called me the night he signed the papers. His voice tired but clear. He had also started therapy, something he had never considered during his marriage. Claire had dismissed the idea whenever it arose, calling it unnecessary, self-indulgent, a sign of weakness. Now Daniel sat in a counselor's office twice a week, learning to recognize the voice in his head that had been programmed by someone else. He told me it was the hardest thing he had ever done. Some days he questioned everything, wondering if his own thoughts were truly his own or just echoes of her control. But he kept going back. We began having dinner together once a week. Every Thursday evening, Daniel would drive to the house where he had grown up, and we would sit at the kitchen table with whatever simple meal I had prepared. The conversations were sometimes awkward, often short. We had lost 8 years of easy communication and rebuilding. It was like learning a language we had both forgotten, but we kept showing up. That was what mattered. Eleanor visited regularly, usually on Sunday afternoons, always bringing something homemade. Her apple pie became a fixture of those visits, the recipe identical to the one Margaret had used for decades. The taste brought my wife back to me in ways that photographs and letters could not. Sensory memory that bypassed grief and went straight to gratitude. One evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset behind the oak tree Daniel had climbed, as a boy, Eleanor set down her tea and looked at me with eyes that held 50 years of friendship. "She would be proud of you," she said quietly. "Margaret, she would be so proud of how you handled all of this." I reached over and took her hand, the same hand that had held my wife's through illness and loss, and the long years of waiting for this moment. "She would be proud of you too," I said. "You kept your promise." Eleanor squeezed my fingers and smiled. and we sat together in comfortable silence as the light faded and the first stars appeared. Justice does not always shout. Sometimes it is just life catching up with the lies, one quiet consequence at a time. A year has passed since the day Claire walked out of Samuel Green's office, the house on Maple Street has slowly remembered how to breathe. The rooms that once felt like occupied territory have reclaimed their original purpose, spaces for living rather than surviving, for memories rather than vigilance. I wake each morning in the bedroom Margaret and I shared for 4 decades, and the first thing I see is the sunlight streaming through the windows she insisted on making large enough to catch. The dawn. The oak tree still stands in the backyard, its branches reaching toward the sky with the same patient ambition they showed when Daniel was a boy, climbing toward clouds he could never quite touch. I had a tree surgeon examine it last spring. Worried that age might have weakened what looked so strong, he pronounced it healthy roots, deep trunk solid, capable of weathering storms for decades to come. Some things, it turns out, are more resilient than they appear. Margaret's garden has been restored. Eleanor helped me with the planning, identifying the perennials my wife had planted years ago that had been neglected into near extinction. We spent weekends on our knees in the dirt, dividing bulbs and transplanting seedlings, coaxing life back into beds that had gone fallow during the years of Claire's occupation. This spring, the garden bloomed for the first time since Margaret's death, colors erupting from soil I had thought was barren. I sat on the porch and watched the flowers open like small miracles, and I understood that my wife was still teaching me things about patience and hope. Daniel visits every Sunday. Now the divorce was finalized 6 months ago, the legal dissolution of a marriage that had been hollow for far longer than either of us realized. He has rebuilt his life in a town 30 minutes away, close enough to visit but far enough to establish his own space. He works at an accounting firm smaller than his previous employer. The kind of place where people know each other's names and remember birthdays. He seems lighter than before, as though the weight he carried for 8 years has finally been set down. Last Sunday, we sat on the porch after dinner, watching the fireflies emerge in the garden as dusk settled over the yard. Daniel was quiet for a long time, the comfortable silence of 2 people who no longer need to fill every moment with words. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful, reflective. "I used to think I lost 8 years," he said, 8 years of my life wasted on someone who never really saw me. But lately I've been thinking about it differently now. I think of it as 8 years of learning what not to be. I considered his words, turning them over. The way I used to turn over architectural problems, examining them from every angle. "Your mother would say the same about any mistake," I finally replied. "She used to tell me that nothing is wasted time if you carry the lesson. Forward, the only real failure is refusing to learn." Daniel nodded slowly, and I saw something in his expression that reminded me of the boy he had been before Claire, before the years of manipulation had dimmed his light. That boy was still there, buried but not destroyed, emerging gradually into the man he was always meant to become. Eleanor remains next door, as she has for 50 years, her presence a constant in a world that has shifted beneath my feet more times than I can count. We share tea every afternoon, now a ritual that began during the crisis and has continued into peace. We talk about Margaret, often sharing memories that might otherwise fade, keeping her alive in the space between us. We talk about life, about grandchildren and gardens, and the small victories of ordinary days. We talk about what remains when the storms pass and the wreckage has been cleared away. Our friendship was forged through decades of proximity and deepened through the crucible of Claire's betrayal. Eleanor kept my wife's secrets for 5 years, guarded evidence she hoped would never be needed, and stepped forward without hesitation when the moment arrived. Some bonds, I have learned, grow stronger under pressure. Ours has become an anchor, a fixed point in the turning world, proof that loyalty can outlast almost anything. This morning, I stood before Margaret's photograph in the living room. The silver frame polished her smile, unchanged by the years since it was captured. I placed a white flower in the small vase beside it, a ritual I have performed every week. Since returning to the house, the flower was from her. Garden grown from bulbs she planted, nourished by soil. She enriched even in this small gesture. Her preparation sustains me. You protected us all. I said to her image, my voice steady, despite the emotion beneath. Even when you weren't here, even when I didn't know I needed protecting, thank you afterward. I sat at my desk and opened the journal I have kept since this ordeal began. The early entries are filled with confusion and fear, the frantic notes of a man trying to make sense of betrayal. The later pages document evidence and strategy, the methodical work of building a case. But today, I wrote about none of those things. Today, I wrote about gratitude. I did not win because I was stronger. I won because I was loved by someone who saw the future clearly, who understood threats I could not perceive, who built defenses I did not know existed. Margaret taught me that protection is not about fighting. It is about preparing, about loving someone enough to shield them from dangers they cannot yet imagine. Eleanor taught me that true friendship outlasts everything. It outlasts distance and time and even death. It waits patiently for the moment it is needed, then steps forward without hesitation or complaint. The greatest gift we can give another person is the promise to be there and the integrity to keep that promise when it costs us something. And Daniel taught me that it is never too late to find your way back 8 years. He spent lost in someone else's shadow, believing lies about himself and about me. But when the truth finally reached him, he chose to walk toward it rather than away. He chose his father. Over his fear, the choice required more courage than anything I've ever done. I closed the journal and looked out the window at the oak tree, at the garden, at the house I built with my own hands, and almost lost to someone else's greed. The afternoon light slanted golden across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance I heard children laughing. I stood back up, not because I'm special, but because I had. People who refuse to let me fall. If you or someone you love is experiencing something similar, financial exploitation, family manipulation, or elder abuse, please reach out. You are not alone. National Elder Abuse Hotline 1-806-771-116. Thank you for staying with me through Douglas's entire journey. This story was about more than revenge or justice. It was about the quiet strength of preparation, the enduring power of love that reaches beyond the grave, and the courage it takes to stand back up when someone tries to knock you down. Douglas did not win because he shouted the loudest or fought the hardest. He won because Margaret loved him enough to see the danger coming and build walls he did not know existed. He won because Eleanor kept a promise for 5 years without wavering. He won because Daniel, despite everything, found the strength to choose truth over fear. These are the victories that matter most, not the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet moments when someone refuses to let you fall. If this story touched you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me what moment affected you the most. Was it Margaret's letter, Daniel's deleted email, the moment father and son finally stood together? Your feedback helps me create more stories that resonate with what matters to you. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be going through something similar, feeling alone, feeling powerless, wondering if anyone sees what they are enduring, and if you or someone you love is experiencing financial exploitation, family manipulation, or elder abuse. Please know that help exists. You are not alone. Contact the National Elder Abuse Hotline at 1-806-771-116. Someone is waiting to listen. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and the unbreakable bonds that hold families together. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve to be protected.